Dear children, good morning to all of you. Today we will have a new lesson, The Enemy, written by Pearls S. Buck, an American writer who was brought up in China. Okay, so the story is all about a doctor named Sadao. Sadao was a Japanese doctor. Okay, his father, like all the Japanese, was very strict and every inch a patriot. And his desire was his son should study for surgery. He sent his son to America to study surgery, and Sadao, while studying at America, happened to fall in love with a girl called Hannah. And after their studies were over, when they came back to their own country, they got married each other and had 2 children. So today, children, we will learn about the story of Dr. Sadao through this lesson, The Enemy. Okay, as a doctor, how far he is successful, and as a patriot like his father, who was every inch a patriot, Sadao also was very patriotic by nature. So let us see what happens in this story. We will go in detail. Okay, now you can take your textbook, page number 24. This is the 4th lesson from your supplementary text. Okay, The Enemy. Yes, The Enemy, Pearls S. Buck. Before you read, it is the time of the World War. An American prisoner of war is washed ashore in a dying state and is found at the doorstep of a Japanese doctor. Should he save him as a doctor or hand him over to the army as a patriot? So this is a question for you also that you have to deal with after the completion of this lesson. So it is all about the dilemma that the Dr. Sadao have undergone about this issue. What is the issue? As a doctor, whether he should treat that prisoner of war who was washed ashore to the place where he was living. Okay, actually Dr. Sadao was living near to a sea or a seashore. Okay, and a prisoner of war was washed ashore to that place, and as a doctor, whether he should treat him, because he is an American. Okay, due to that war-like condition, Americans and Japanese were not maintaining good relation. Enmities was very much there. Okay, so this is one question, one dilemma. Or as a good patriot, whether he should hand over this prisoner of war to the army. So let us see what happens at the end of the story. Okay, children, are you ready? Shall we begin? Yes. Dr. Sadao Hoki, that's full name, house was built on the spot of a Japanese coast where as a little boy he had often played. The low square stone house was set upon rocks well above a narrow beach that was outlined with the bent pine trees. As a boy, Sadao had climbed the pines, supporting himself on his bare feet, as he had seen men do in the South Seas when they climbed for coconut trees. His father had taken him often to the islands of those seas, and never had he failed to say to the little brave boy, at his side, those islands yonder, yonder means above, they are the stepping stones to the future for Japan. Where shall we step from? Where shall we step from them? Sado had asked seriously. Who knows? His father had answered. Who can limit our future? It depends on what we make it. So this is the advice given to the boy Sado from his father. Who can limit the future? It all depends upon what they make. Okay, children, now Dr. Sado's house was built near a seashore, I told you. It was a very strong house made of stone and rocks. There were many pine trees nearby his house, and as a boy, he had a great inclination to climb trees, like people in the South Seas area climbing coconut trees. Okay, and here is a question: who was Dr. Sado and where was his house? The first question is already answered now. Okay. Now the second, actually it's a very lengthy lesson, okay, but still we will go slowly. Sado had taken this into his mind as he did everything his father said. His father, who never joked or played with him, but who spent infinite pains upon him, who was his only son. Actually, his father was very serious in the sense he never used to cut jokes with him or play with him, but was very particular that his son should study for surgery. Sado knew that his education was his father's chief concern. So dear children, this is you have to underline. His father's concern was his study. For this reason, he had been sent at 22, means at the age of 22, he was sent to America to learn all that he could be learned for surgery and medicine. Okay, now there is a big craze among you also that everybody wanted to become doctors. Okay, you are all getting ready for that. So here also the father wanted Sado to become a surgeon. He had come back at 30 after studies. At the age of 22 he has gone, and at the age of 30 he came back, and before his father died he had seen Sado become famous not only as a surgeon but as a scientist. Two posts, one as a doctor and one as another as a scientist. Who became famous? Dr. Sado, and that was a dream come true for his father. And because he was perfecting a discovery which would render wounds entirely clean, he had not been sent abroad with the troops. Actually, in the warlike situation, Sado would be sent with the troops, but because of his discovery with the wound, he was making a research or a discovery to remove the scar of the wound. Total wound should be cleaned, and he had not been sent to the troops. Also, he knew there was some slight danger that the old general might need an operation for a condition for which he was now being treated medically. And another reason that he was not sent to the troop because he was treating a general, the military general, who had great faith on this doctor only. He did not want himself be treated by any other doctor in Japan. Okay, so because of these two reasons, Sado was not sent to the troops. Here is a short answer question: why was he not sent abroad with the troops? One thing, he was perfecting a discovery how to remove the wounds completely. Second thing is he was treating the general who was suffering from heart related ailment. Okay, and for this possibility Sado was kept in Japan. Okay, clear children? Now the next paragraph: clouds were rising from the ocean now. The unexpected warmth of the past few days had at night drawn heavy fog from the cold waves. Actually, this line shows about the climatic condition of that place. Okay, Sado watched a mist hide outline of a little island near the shore and then come creeping up the beach below the house, wreathing around the pines. In a few minutes fog would be wrapped about the house too. then he would go into the room where Hannah, his wife, would be waiting for him with the two children. So I told you he was married with Hannah, another Japanese girl, and having two children now. So actually, on seeing this bad weather condition outside, the doctor would come inside the house where Hannah and his two children were staying with him. But at this moment, the door opened and she looked out. A dark blue woolen hero, that is a dress over her kimono, that is another dress of the Japanese. She came to him affectionately and put her arm through his as he stood. A romantic scene is there. Both husband and wife standing and expressing their love each other, and smiled and said nothing. He had met Hannah in America, but he had waited to fall in love with her until he was sure she was a Japanese. His father would never have received her unless she had been pure in her race. He wondered often whom he would have married if he had not met Hannah. Now, both the couple, the Sado and his wife Hannah, thinking about those days where they fell in love. Actually, his father was very strict that the son Sado should marry only a Japanese girl, that too from their own race. And Sado also very particular that before he fell in love with Hannah, he ensured all these details. And they met at that American professor's house in America. Okay, in the most casual way, by chance, literally at an American professor's house. The professor and his wife had been a kind of people anxious to do something for their few foreign students, and the students, though bored, had accepted this kindness. Sado had often told Hannah how nearly he had not gone to Professor Harley's house that night. Now they were remembering about the American professors there, and how they got accommodated in their house in America. The rooms were so small, the food so bad. Actually, no good facilities were there those days when they were staying in America. The room was small and food was bad. The professor's wife, so voluble. She is very voluble, loudly talking type. But he had gone and there he had found Hannah, a new student, and had felt he would love her if it were at all possible. So Dr. Sado decided to love her, love Hannah, and who met her at the professor's house. So that is the background, just they were recalling about it. Now he felt her hand on his arm and was aware of the pleasure it gave him. Even though they had been married years enough to have the two children, for they had not married heedlessly in America. Okay, now they are settled, got married and having two children. They never did anything without any proper plan. They had finished their work at school and had come home to Japan, and when his father had seen her, the marriage had been arranged in the old Japanese way. Actually, they did not make any hurry of getting married. So the matter was disclosed to father after their studies were over, and finally the father solemnized their marriage with all traditional way of the Japanese. Although Sado and Hannah had talked everything over beforehand, they were perfectly happy. She laid her neck against his arm. Okay, while standing there, they remembered all these things. It was at this moment that both of them saw something black come out of the mist. It was a man. He was flung up out of the ocean. Flung means thrown. It seemed to his feet by a breaker. He staggered, walked unsteadily. Staggered means walked unsteadily. A few steps, his body outlined against the mist, his arms above his head, then the curled mist hid him again. Suddenly, the couple could see something was moving through in the mist. Actually, in the shore, what happened? A man was washed ashore, and his outline was visible. Okay. Who is that? Hannah cried. Suddenly, Hannah made a cry, saying that who is that fellow? She dropped Sado's arm, and their romantic mood was disturbed by the appearance of that man. She dropped Shadow's arm and they both leaned over the railing of the veranda. Now they saw him again. The man was on his hands and knees crawling. Earlier he was standing, now that man was crawling, means walking on legs and hands. Then they saw him fall on his face and lie there. Finally he collapsed on the seashore. A fisherman perhaps. Shadow felt that he could be a fisherman, washed from his boat. He ran quickly down the steps and behind him Hannah came, her white sleeves flying. Actually, in a cinematic style, when she was running, her sleeves were flying. A mile or two away on the either side, there were fishing villages. Actually, fishing villages were nearby, but here was only the bare and lonely coast. Actually, the place where Shadow belonged, it was not a good beach, because there were sharp stones and rocks, dangerous rocks. The surf beyond the beach was spiked with rocks, like the needle edge spiked with rocks. Somehow the man had managed to come through them. He must be badly torn. Actually, nobody would walk through that beach, because it is full of thorny stalks, rocks, and but this man somehow managed, and so the doctor felt he might be torn or injured. They saw when they came towards him that indeed it was so. The sand on one side of him had already a stain of red soaking through. He is wounded, Shadow exclaimed. He made a haste to the man who lay motionless, his face in the sand, an old cap stuck to his head, soaked means drenched with seawater. He was in wet rags. Rags means torn clothes, rags of clothes. Shadow stopped Hannah at his side and turned the man's head. They saw the face. A white man, Hannah whispered, because they had been to America for their studies, so she could easily identify the man was a white man, American. Yes, it was a white man. The wet cap fell away and there was his wet yellow hair also showing that he was an American, long as though for many weeks it had not been cut, and upon his young and tortured face was a rough yellow beard. He was unconscious and knew nothing that they did for him. Actually, that man who was washed ashore by physical appearance was an American, with that hair color and his complexion, white complexioned man. Now Shadow remembered the wound, and with his expert finger he began to search for it. Blood flowed freshly at his touch. On the right side of his lower back, Shadow saw that a gun wound. Okay, where was the wound? A gun wound had been reopened. That means the right side of his lower back. Sometime not many days ago, the man had been shot and had not been tended, means treated. It was bad chance that the rock had struck the wound, and not only the gunshot, but the rock had struck the wound. Oh, how he is bleeding, Hannah whispered again in a solemn voice. The mist screened them now completely, and at this time of the day no one came by. The fishermen had gone home, and even the chance of beachcombers, one who comes and searches the beach is called as beachcombers, would have considered the way at the end. What shall we do with this man? Shadow muttered. Okay, but his trained hands seemed of their own will to be doing what they could staunch. Actually, spelling should be staunch. Here's a what you call spelling mistake is there. Staunch. It should be staunch, to stop the blood. Fearful bleeding, he packed the wound with the sea moss that strewed, means were thrown to the beach. The man mourned with pain in his stupor. What do you mean by stupor? Unable to get the sense. That stage is called stupor. Okay, stupor means you cannot feel. That is why it is called stupor. You can write it. A state in which one cannot think or use the senses is called stupor. In, for example, we say in drunken stupor. After getting drunk, people cannot behave properly. Their senses may not work. So we call it a drunken stupor. Here, like that, the man out because of the wound is in the stupor state. That means condition, cannot feel the sense. Okay, the best thing that we could do would be to put him back in the sea, Shadow said, answering himself. So suddenly an idea struck in the mind of the doctor. Actually, what happened? Nothing happened. A man who was washed ashore was a American, okay, by appearance, and Americans and Japanese were enemies. So it is not good for the doctor to accommodate him. But as a doctor, he felt like treating him. And another idea that struck the mind of the doctor is to throw him out, or back to the sea. Now that the bleeding was stopped for the moment, he stood up and dusted the sand from his hands. Yes, undoubtedly that would be the best. Hannah also supported better to throw the man back to the sea steadily, but she continued to stare down at the motionless man. If we sheltered a white man in our house, we should be arrested, and if we turned him over as a prisoner, he would certainly die, Shadow said. Okay, there are two options. One is sheltering is not allowed. Even if shelter he was given for arrest, he will die. Okay, or he will be killed. The kindest thing would be to put him back to the sea, Hannah said. Then better keeping him back in the sea so that he will die. Anyway, death is certain. A natural death is better than a cruel death from the hands of the military, Hannah said. But neither of them moved. They were staring with a curious repulsion. What is repulsion? Dislike. Repulsion means dislike. Upon the inert figure. What is inert figure? Means lacking the power of movement. Lacking the power to move is called inert. You can write down. Inert figure. What is he? Hannah whispered. The another doubt that came from Hannah, the wife of doctor. There is something about him that looks American, Shadow said. He took up the battered cap. Battered means torn and old cap. Yes, there, almost gone, was the faint lettering. A sailor, he said, from an American warship. He spelled it out, US Navy. And the man is from US Navy, an American prisoner of war. So children, here we stop for the day. Now we have come across three main characters. One is Shadow, the doctor, his wife, Hannah, and the third character that is introduced is the American prisoner of war. His name is Tom, that you will come across slowly, but for the time being, let us make a review of what we have learned already today. The story is all about a Japanese doctor named Shadow, and Shadow had his education in America. Presently, the Chinese and the Americans are enemies because of the World War, right? And now one day when this husband and wife were standing in front of their house, they could see the mist being circling round, wreathing around their houses and the pine trees nearby. Suddenly they could see a man who was walking, later on crawling, and finally lying, and it was none but a prisoner of war. And there came the dilemma whether to save the wounded man or to drop him back to the sea. And both way he will get his death. Either he will be killed with the rocks at the sea, or he will be killed by the military if given to arrest. Okay, here we will stop for the day, dear children. All of you make a thorough reading. We will go line by line and slowly we will complete the lesson, though it is very lengthy. Already a video presentation is already given to you in the Google Classroom. Now read well and try to write the important question and their answer. Bye.